When we think of family, most of us picture a safe place, a place where we are loved without conditions. But for some, that picture is cracked from the very beginning. This story is about a daughter named Aisha, and the father who left her behind as if she were disposable. It is about the pain that kind of betrayal leaves behind, and how, years later, she found her own way to respond. Not with rage, not with chaos, but with a calm and deliberate revenge that shaped her life and his. Aisha was only 7 when her father walked out of the small apartment where she lived with her mother. She remembered it so vividly that even 20 years later, the images returned like shadows that never faded. The sound of a suitcase being dragged across the floor, the sharp click of the door as it shut, and her mother's quiet sobs that lasted through the night. For Aisha, it was the day her childhood ended. Her father, whom we'll call Imran, wasn't the kind of man who seemed cruel at first glance. To outsiders, he was charming, well-spoken, and social. He laughed loudly at gatherings, knew how to impress his colleagues, and often spoke of values like responsibility and family. But beneath that polished exterior was a selfishness that only his closest family ever saw. Aisha had seen flashes of it even before he left. Moments when he would scold her for asking too many questions, or when he would disappear for days under the excuse of work trips. Her mother, Samina, often stayed quiet, covering for him, saying, "Your father is busy, Beta. He loves you." But a child can sense distance. Aisha felt it. The truth revealed itself slowly. Imran wasn't just leaving his wife. He was leaving his daughter for another woman. Not just another woman, but another family. The woman, whose name was Farah, already had a young son from a previous marriage, and soon after Imran moved in with her, they had 2 children of their own. For Aisha, the sting wasn't only that her father abandoned her, it was that he had chosen to be a father somewhere else, deliberately building the life he had denied her. Samina tried to raise her daughter with strength, but life was harsh. She worked long hours as a teacher in a local school, juggling bills, rent, and the never-ending demands of survival. Aisha learned early that she couldn't ask for things other children took for granted: new clothes, expensive toys, outings to amusement parks. Her mother gave her love, warmth, and encouragement, but she could not give her the stability of 2 parents or the security of wealth. Despite the struggle, Aisha grew into a thoughtful, observant child. She was quiet but intelligent, always watching people, trying to understand what made them who they were. Somewhere deep down, she carried an ache, a question that never went away. Why wasn't I enough for my father? It wasn't anger that grew in her heart. It was something colder, something that lingered and waited. As she grew older, she learned more about her father's new life. Relatives would gossip. Sometimes she overheard conversations at weddings or family gatherings. "Imran's children are doing so well," someone would say. "His son goes to a private school. His daughter just won a prize in a competition." Every word was like salt in an open wound. Aisha wondered why those children deserved his care and attention, while she had to sit outside in the rain, waiting for her mother to finish a parent-teacher meeting because they couldn't afford a rickshaw ride home. Her teenage years were difficult. There were days she hated him with every fiber of her being, and then there were days she simply felt invisible, like she never existed in his world. She never once received a phone call, a birthday card, or even a single visit. Imran had erased her from his life so completely that had she not remembered his face, she might have doubted he was ever real. But Samina was determined that her daughter would rise above bitterness. She pushed Aisha to focus on education. "Knowledge is your strength," she would say gently. "We don't need him, Beta. You will create your own path." And so, Aisha poured herself into books. While other teenagers sought distractions, she sought escape in stories, in science, in literature. She became a top student, the kind of girl who teachers praised for her discipline and quiet determination. And yet, whenever her father's name was mentioned, something hardened in her chest. It wasn't the wildfire of rage, it was the calm steel of resolve. Even as a teenager, she whispered to herself, "One day, he will know what he threw away." That day, however, was not soon to come. Life still had many lessons to teach her. At 16, Aisha got her first real glimpse of her father's other family. She was walking home from school when a shiny black car pulled up at a shop nearby. Out stepped Imran, dressed in a crisp suit, laughing with a teenage boy who looked about her age. The boy was carrying a cricket bat, and Imran ruffled his hair, saying something that made him grin. Beside them, a younger girl held onto Imran's arm, tugging playfully. Aisha froze. It was like watching a movie of the life she was never given. Imran didn't see her. Or if he did, he didn't acknowledge her. The car drove off, leaving Aisha standing there, her school bag heavy on her back, her throat burning with unshed tears. That night she didn't cry. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying that scene over and over. What struck her most wasn't just that her father was happy. It was how natural he looked in that role. How easily he had slipped into being the father she never had. From that day onward, something shifted in Aisha. She stopped waiting for him to return. She stopped wondering if he would regret it. Instead, she began to build an inner world where her silence would be her strength. Revenge, she realized, didn't have to be loud. It could be quiet, patient, and devastating in its own time. Years passed. She graduated school with excellent grades and earned a scholarship to a university. While many of her classmates came from privileged homes, she carried herself with dignity, never letting them see the struggles behind her calm demeanor. She worked part-time jobs, tutored students, and supported her mother. Her life wasn't easy, but every hardship became fuel for her determination. During these years, Imran's presence was like a ghost in the background. She rarely saw him, but when she did, she noticed the pride with which he displayed his new family. At social events, he introduced his children as if they were his greatest achievement, and when someone asked about Aisha, he would simply brush the topic aside, saying vaguely, "Things didn't work out." As if she were a mistake he preferred not to remember. It might have crushed another person. But Aisha was no longer that little girl begging for his attention. She was turning into a woman who understood that revenge doesn't come from screaming or confrontation. It comes from living in such a way that the one who abandoned you is forced to see what they lost. She started to plan, not with anger, but with careful intention. Her revenge would not be about harming him physically, nor about humiliating him publicly. It would be about showing him, in the calmest possible way, that his rejection had only made her stronger, and that the daughter he abandoned had risen higher than he could ever have imagined. And in the quiet of her heart, she promised herself, "When the time comes, he will see me. He will have no choice but to see me." The stage of her revenge was being set, though Imran had no idea. For him, life seemed perfect. Wealth, reputation, and a family he adored. But life has a way of circling back, and the past, no matter how deeply buried, always returns. Aisha was waiting, patiently, calmly. University life was a turning point for Aisha. It was the first time she had stepped into a world larger than the cramped apartment and the narrow lanes of her childhood neighborhood. The campus buzzed with energy. Students from all kinds of backgrounds, professors with ideas that stretched minds in every direction, clubs, debates, and endless opportunities. For someone like Aisha, who had grown up quietly observing the world, this was both intimidating and exciting. At first, she kept to herself. Years of being overlooked by her father and pitied by relatives had taught her to stay guarded. She attended classes, spent long hours in the library, and returned to her hostel or part-time job without much socializing. But over time, people noticed her. There was something about her calm intelligence, the way she listened more than she spoke, that drew others to her. Classmates came to her for help with assignments. Professors recommended her for academic projects. She was never the loudest voice in the room, but her presence carried weight. What no one around her knew was that, beneath her composed surface, a quiet storm lived. Aisha never spoke of her father, but his absence shaped every decision she made. She studied harder because she wanted to prove that she was not the failure he had discarded. She accepted leadership roles in university clubs because she wanted to show that she could command respect without his name. She learned to speak with confidence because she knew one day her voice would need to confront him, not in anger, but in undeniable strength. During these years, her mother, Samina, remained her anchor. Every weekend, Aisha visited home, bringing groceries, fixing things around the house, sharing stories of her classes. Samina never spoke ill of Imran, but sometimes, late at night, Aisha would hear her sigh softly, as if wondering how different life might have been. Aisha wished she could erase that sadness from her mother's eyes. She couldn't, but she could make sure her mother's sacrifices were never in vain. By her third year of university, Aisha had already built a reputation as one of the most promising students in her field. She was studying business administration, with a focus on finance, a subject that fascinated her not only for its logic, but also for the independence it promised. She knew that in this world, money wasn't just numbers. It was power, respect, security. Everything her father had denied her. If she could master it, she could carve out her own place in society, one that didn't depend on anyone's approval. Fate, however, has a curious way of placing people in each other's paths. One day, while attending a business seminar in the city, she noticed a familiar name on the list of guest speakers: Imran Khan, her father. He was now a senior executive in a trading company, invited to speak about market strategies and leadership. Her first reaction was disbelief. She had avoided him for so many years that seeing his name in print felt unreal. But it was him. The same man who had abandoned her now stood on a stage, dressed immaculately, addressing a crowd with confidence. From the back row, Aisha watched him. His hair was grayer, his shoulders a little heavier with age, but his charm was intact. The audience nodded and applauded as he spoke about resilience, about adapting to change, about being a responsible leader. Aisha's lips curled into the faintest smile. Here was a man celebrated for values he had failed to uphold in his own home. The irony wasn't lost on her. For a moment, anger stirred inside her, but she quickly let it settle. She wasn't here to explode. She was here to learn. Watching him, she realized something important. If her revenge was ever to succeed, she needed to understand his world fully. She needed to know how men like him built their reputations, how they protected their image, and what would wound them most deeply when the time came. That evening, as the seminar ended and people rushed to meet the guest speakers, Aisha quietly slipped out. She didn't want to speak to him. Not yet. The time wasn't right. But she walked away with a new clarity. Her revenge wouldn't be about shouting in his face or demanding answers. It would be about becoming everything he believed she couldn't be. And then, in the most calm and deliberate way, showing him that his abandonment had only sharpened her strength. Over the next few years, Aisha's journey intensified. She completed her degree with distinction and landed a job at a reputable financial firm. It wasn't easy. The corporate world was harsh, filled with competition, egos, and politics. But Aisha had been tempered by harder battles already. Compared to being abandoned at 7, the pettiness of colleagues and the pressure of deadlines felt manageable. At work, she built her reputation step by step. She was meticulous, ethical, and unshakably calm, even in crises. Clients trusted her judgment. Managers admired her discipline. Within a few years, she had risen to a managerial position, something rare for someone so young. With her salary, she moved her mother into a better home, one with sunlight streaming through the windows and enough space for both of them to breathe. For the first time in years, Samina looked peaceful. It was around this time that Aisha's path crossed with her father's again. But this time, not as a silent observer. She had been assigned to a major financial project involving multiple companies. During the initial meeting, when the list of partner executives was shared, she saw his name once again. Imran Khan, Senior Director. This time she didn't flinch. She was ready. The day of the first joint meeting arrived. Aisha walked into the boardroom, dressed in a simple but elegant suit, her hair neatly tied back, her demeanor professional. Around the long table, men and women in suits exchanged greetings, and then he walked in. Imran. He scanned the room, smiling as he shook hands with colleagues, before his eyes landed on her. For a moment, his smile froze. Aisha saw the flicker of recognition. He knew who she was. His daughter, the one he had erased. The air between them seemed to tighten, though no one else noticed. Calmly, Aisha nodded a polite greeting. No warmth, no bitterness, just professionalism. "Good morning," she said softly, as if he were any other executive in the room. Imran cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and replied, "Good morning." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Throughout the meeting, Aisha maintained her composure, presenting her analysis with clarity, engaging in discussions with confidence. She never once referred to their personal connection. To the others in the room, she was simply a sharp, talented manager doing her job. But Imran knew better. He knew this was his daughter, the child he had abandoned, now sitting across the table, matching him in professionalism, perhaps even surpassing him. For Aisha, this was only the beginning. Revenge, she knew, was not about a single moment. It was about creating a series of choices, each one deliberate, each one forcing the other person to confront what they had done. After the meeting, as people packed their files and left, Imran lingered for a moment. He seemed unsure, almost hesitant. Finally, he approached her. "Aisha," he said quietly, his voice lower than usual. She looked up, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Yes, Mr. Khan," she replied, her tone calm, professional. The title struck him. She had not called him father. She had not even called him by his first name. To her, he was just another man in the corporate world, a stranger. For a moment, he seemed to struggle for words. Then, catching himself, he simply nodded. "Your presentation was impressive." "Thank you," she said evenly, and then, without waiting for more, she packed her bag and left the room. Outside, she walked into the crisp evening air, her heartbeat steady. She had done it. She had faced him, not with tears, not with rage, but with calm strength. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Her revenge had already begun. Because the one thing Imran had always wanted, control, authority, the ability to dictate the narrative, was no longer his. The daughter he had dismissed as unworthy now stood on equal footing, refusing to acknowledge his role in her life. That was a wound deeper than any insult. Over the coming months, Aisha continued to work on the project. Each interaction with Imran was polite, professional, and distant. She never once slipped into familiarity. She treated him the same way she treated every other executive, with respect, but no intimacy. And each time Imran seemed to shrink a little, as though the weight of her calm indifference pressed on him more heavily than anger ever could. He began trying to bridge the gap. Small comments, attempts at casual conversation, asking about her work. But Aisha never gave him what he wanted. She answered briefly, kept her tone neutral, and moved on. To others, nothing seemed unusual. But to him, the message was clear. She didn't need him. She didn't even acknowledge him as her father. And in the silence she maintained, there was a power far greater than words. Months turned into a year, and the corporate project Aisha worked on with Imran's company was eventually completed. By the end of it, she had solidified her reputation not just within her own firm, but among the partner companies as well. People admired her professionalism, her ability to remain composed under pressure, and her sharp insights. She was no longer just a rising talent. She was a name people began to remember in the business world. For Imran, however, the project had been something entirely different. He had gone into it with the confidence of a seasoned executive, but he had walked out carrying a weight he could not shake off. Sitting across the table from Aisha, week after week, he had been forced to confront a truth he had buried for decades. The daughter he abandoned was not broken, not lost, not waiting for his approval. She was thriving without him. And worse, she looked at him as though he were nothing more than another professional contact. That was the wound that kept him awake at night. He began making efforts outside of work. One evening, after a long meeting, he tried to catch her before she left the building. "Aisha," he called, his voice softer this time, almost pleading. She turned, her expression calm as ever. "Yes, Mr. Khan? Can we Can we talk? Just for a few minutes. Not about work. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment, unreadable. Then politely she shook her head. I don't think that's necessary. I'll see you at the next meeting. And with that, she walked away. It was deliberate. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't giving him what he wanted. Imran had spent years believing he had erased her from his life. Now she was erasing him from hers, but calmly, without drama, without raised voices. Her silence spoke volumes. Over time, word spread within Imran's extended family about Aisha's success. Relatives who once pitied her now spoke of her with admiration. She's managing big projects in the city, they said. She's moved her mother into a beautiful home. She's doing better than all of us. Those whispers eventually reached Imran's wife, Farah, and his children. His son once casually asked at the dinner table, "Is it true you have another daughter? Someone said she's in business like you." Imran froze. Farah's eyes narrowed. For years he had avoided talking about Aisha, dismissing her as part of a failed past. But now the past had returned, not as a burden, but as a success story. And the more he tried to brush it aside, the more his family became curious. His children began asking questions. Who was she? Why had he never spoken about her? Why had she never been a part of their lives? It was the kind of discomfort Imran had never expected. He had thought he could simply replace one family with another, and the world would forget. But life doesn't work that way. The truth has a way of finding its way back. Meanwhile, Aisha continued to rise. Within a few more years, she earned a senior position in her firm, eventually starting her own consultancy. Her name began appearing in business magazines, and she was invited to speak at conferences. The same kind of stage her father had once stood on now became hers. And when she spoke about resilience, about building strength from adversity, her words carried a quiet authenticity that her father's never had. She never mentioned him. She didn't need to. Her story was written on her success. It was around this time that Imran, now approaching his late 50s, began facing difficulties in his career. Markets shifted, his company's profits declined, and some of his decisions were questioned. The confidence that once defined him started to crack. At home, his wife and children, who had grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle, began resenting the changes. Arguments became common. His children, now young adults, were more independent, less reliant on him. One evening, he saw an article in a magazine featuring Aisha. Her photo was there, calm and poised, with the headline, "From Struggles to Success, the Journey of a Rising Business Leader." The article praised her achievements, her resilience, her story of overcoming challenges. Imran sat with the magazine in his hands for hours, his heart heavy. He realized something that night. His other children respected him, yes, but they did not look at him with the same quiet admiration Aisha's colleagues looked at her. His wife tolerated him, but she did not inspire him. The one person who had every reason to despise him had instead built a life of dignity that cast his own choices into shadow. For the first time, Imran felt truly abandoned, not by others, but by the weight of his own decisions. He tried again to reach out. He sent Aisha an email, congratulating her on her success and suggesting they meet. She replied briefly, thanking him for the message but declining the invitation. He called her office once, asking to speak with her. She politely told the receptionist to say she was unavailable. He even sent a letter through a relative, but her response was the same: calm, polite, and distant. There was no anger in her words. No insults, no accusations, only silence, and that silence became his punishment. Years later, when Samina fell ill, Imran appeared at the hospital, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of habit. Aisha was by her mother's side, handling everything with steady hands. When Imran walked in, Samina turned her face away, unwilling to acknowledge him. Aisha, however, looked directly at him. Her gaze was calm, steady, almost kind, but detached. "You don't need to be here," she said softly. "I just wanted to." He began, but his voice broke. "You left us when we needed you," she said, her tone even. "Now we don't need you. Please leave." There was no shouting, no scene, just a quiet dismissal, and that hurt him more than any argument could have. In the final years of his life, Imran found himself increasingly isolated. His children from Farah's side were busy with their own lives, less dependent on him. His wife grew distant, his career declined, and always, in the back of his mind, was the daughter who had shown him, without a single word of anger, what he had lost. Aisha, on the other hand, continued forward. She cared for her mother until her final days, honoring her sacrifices. She expanded her business, mentored young women, and built a reputation for integrity and strength. She never needed to ruin her father publicly, never needed to expose him. Her revenge had been far more subtle and far more effective, because in the end, the man who had abandoned her was forced to live with the knowledge that the daughter he had discarded had risen higher than he ever had, and that she had done it without him, without his name, without his support. He had lost the chance to be part of her life, and no amount of regret could change that. And Aisha? She lived her life with peace. She had carried the wound of abandonment, but she had transformed it into quiet strength. Her revenge was not in destroying him, it was in becoming whole without him. And in that calm triumph she found closure. That is the essence of calm revenge. It doesn't always come with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it comes in silence, in strength, in showing the one who hurt you that you never needed them to begin with. If you've made it this far into Aisha's story, I want to thank you for listening. Stories like these remind us that even the deepest betrayals can be met with dignity, and that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to My Calm Revenge for more thoughtful, detailed stories like this one. Your support helps us continue bringing these calm yet powerful tales to life.